Welcome back to the channel, guys. Gaston right here, and if you're new to this place, I'm a photographer from Miami. I do gear reviews, tutorials, behind the scene. I've been covering a lot of rumors, so if you enjoy that type of information, consider subscribing to the channel and also enable notifications for more content like this one. The Canon EOS R just doesn't overheat, and I've been shooting this camera in Miami in 100-degree weather, photography, videos, 4K, 1080p. I just cannot make this camera overheat, and that alone, being able to actually get the job done, it's something that is priceless, guys. And you know, you're not gonna get that from the Canon EOS R5. Now, we already know all the problems that the Canon EOS R5 is having, and spending all that kind of cash for a camera that actually needs to actually cool off. It's not a good camera to have on set or have it at the studio. So this camera is an RF capable camera. So you are gonna be able to enjoy with this camera all the RF glass that is out there. And this is one of the reasons why I can actually vouch for this camera, because some of you know I'm a Sony shooter. I've been shooting with Sony for 6 years. I used to shoot with Canons before and Nikons, but since I got the EOS R, I actually fell in love with the system. I fell in love with the glass, and I pretty much have a solid collection of glass right now that I'm using with this camera. And you don't have to spend $3,900 to actually get great qualities and great glass. This camera features a 30 megapixel CMOS sensor, and the quality out of the sensor is actually incredible. This camera features 13.5 stops of dynamic range, which is actually really good for this camera. It's almost the same dynamic range as a 5D Mark IV. And if you're familiar with a camera, you know, you're gonna get the same dynamic range with this camera. So now when I got this camera, you know, I was a little bit concerned because I came from the A7R III, and then I got the A7R IV, so 42 megapixel and 61 megapixel. So this one has a 30 megapixel sensor, and I thought that maybe if I need to crop, you know, I'm gonna lose a lot of the details. But you know, I've been doing a lot of professional work with this camera, and a lot of my work, because I do portrait photography mostly and product photography, I am required to crop a lot of the times. The client wants that picture and I need to crop in. And to be honest with you, this camera hasn't disappointed me. 30 megapixel is going to get the job done. Yes, the R5 has 45 megapixel, but how many times are we gonna need 45 megapixels? So now let's talk about the body, the buttons, and the dials, because the EOS R is going to give you a much similar experience than the R5. Remember, the R5 has almost the same buttons as this camera, and let me show you something. The top-down screen that you see in the EOS R, you only have it in the R5, which is at $3,900. Right here in the EOS R, you have it by default, a camera that only costs $1,800. So it is actually really handy once you get used to it, you know, just to preview a lot of the information in one spot. I use it a lot, so I really like it. Now, the Canon EOS R5 does have an additional dial rather than having this touch bar right there. But to be honest with you, with the R system, you always gain another dial or a ring. Every lens has this ring that can be configured for a function. So you can actually control the aperture, the exposure, and the shutter speed with dials, or two dials and one ring. So you're not missing anything with this camera. The button layouts are almost the same, you know, same size. They are very nice feel, and you know, you get pretty much everything that you need within the interface. The screen that you're gonna find in the Canon EOS R5 and the EOS R is exactly the same thing, 2.1 million dots of resolution. This screen is actually so crispy. It's also the very angled screen. It flips out just like the one on the Canon EOS R5. It has the touchscreen functionality, you know, all the things that you may expect from the Canon interface. Now, when it comes to the EVF, yes, there's a little bit more resolution when going with the Canon EOS R5. You get about 5.7 million dots of resolution with that EVF, where this one only gives you 3.6. But in my opinion, I have no complaint. And again, you know, a lot of times I also preview on the screen. So, you know, this camera does pretty much everything I need good enough for me. Now, let's talk about the ports. There are gonna be some differences right here, but very slight differences. Number one, the EOS R feature a USB-C port. Now, this one, you cannot charge the camera with whatever charger. You're gonna have to use the one that Canon supplies you with the camera. With the EOS R5, I believe that you can use phone chargers to charge the camera and any other charger out there. You're also having the EOS R a mini HDMI, whereas on all my Sony cameras, I have the crappy micro HDMI. I snapped the one already in my A7 III, so this one is a much more welcome feature. Also, you have a microphone input, so you're not gonna have any problems recording audio in this camera, and you're not gonna have any problems monitoring the audio because we also have headphone jacks. So pretty much everything that you're gonna need as a videographer is going to be in this camera. Now let's talk about video specs, because there is a difference between both cameras, but this one may also be a better camera when it comes to video. First of all, the Canon EOS R5 can shoot 8K video, but to make a long story short, we all know the problems. The camera heats up, you gotta shut down the camera, you gotta wait 20 minutes, 10 minutes, sometimes even an hour before you can use the camera. Now, I don't know if by hybrid shooting, let's say, you're a photographer. I do a lot of shooting and also take behind the scene, to edit my videos, slow motions and stuff like that. I don't know if shooting pictures and then also hybrid shooting, you can also lock up the camera. Now, can you imagine shooting a couple of behind the scenes, your photo shoot lasts 2 hours, you took 20 clips in 4K 120, and all of a sudden your camera locks up and you cannot take picture anymore. That is actually a big problem, and it's something that you should keep in mind if you're planning to use the camera as a hybrid shooting camera. You may be out of photography camera altogether. With this camera, there's no overheating and there's no limitation. The only limitation is the 30-minute when it comes to the video, but you also have it in the R5, so you're not getting any upgrade right there. You also have 4K video recording up to 30p, 8-bit, 420. Yeah, it is not the 4:2, but we're gonna talk about that in just a moment. Now, this camera does have a crop of 1.75, and it is a heavy crop, but this problem got actually solved when I got my 15 to 35 millimeters f2.8 lens. Now, the 15 millimeter with a crop factor of 1.75 equal 26.6, I believe, millimeters, and that is actually pretty wide enough. A lot of us vlog with 24 millimeter lenses. At 2.6 millimeter more, it's not a huge difference, guys. And also, if you want to shoot ultra wide, you can always shoot ultra wide in full HD because there is not a crop, and again, there is no heating problems with this camera. Now, the great thing about this camera that not a lot of people are talking about is that you can actually output via HDMI 4K up to 30p, 10-bit, 422. So that is actually incredible, guys. So if you're thinking of getting the R5 for the 10-bit capabilities, you can get it already from this camera. And chances are that if you're getting the R5 for professional video capabilities, you're gonna have an external recorder and you're gonna wanna preview your false color, your zebras, your histogram, and the whole 9 yards. So you're gonna be able to do it here. You're gonna be able to record onto the HDMI recorder and also record onto the SD card, which is the other problem that I wanted to talk about this camera, or a problem for a lot of people. This camera only has one SD card slot, and that may be a problem, but like I mentioned before, if you're gonna be using the camera to shoot video, by having an HDMI recorder, you also gain a bigger screen, you get better preview of your exposure, and you gain dual recordability, if that's the word, onto the HDMI recording and the SD card. Now, yeah, that is actually pretty incredible, man, for $1,800 versus $3,900. Now let's talk about some of the video features of the Canon EOS R and the R5. Now we know that the R5 films 8K video, but we also know that the camera has a lot of problems overheating, and the camera becomes inoperable, useless for up to 2 hours sometimes. Now, none of those issues exist with this camera, and this camera does not film in 8K video, but it does Full HD up to 120 frames per second. You're also gonna have 4K video capabilities up to 30p, 8-bit, 420, not 422. And you're gonna get a pretty undesirable crop of 1.75. Hold on. However, the crop factor was a problem for me at the beginning, but it is not a problem anymore after I got my 15 millimeters to 35 millimeters f2.8 RF glass. When you factor in 15 millimeters with a 1.75 crop factor, we are talking about 26.6 millimeters, and that is actually more than enough for most wider needs for people out there. So I actually even vlog with a lens and I have no problem. And whenever I want wider, I go full HD. So that's not gonna be a problem. Now, the other thing that a lot of people are talking about is that this camera can also record 4K video up to 30p, 10-bit, 4:2 when shooting or recording onto an HDMI recorder. So chances are that if you get in the Canon EOS R5, you're not going to be able to enjoy the 8K video nor the 4K 120 and not even the 4K 60 because you're going to have overheating problems, and you even have heating problems in some of the 4K videos up to 30p. So So remember, this camera can give you 10-bit video capabilities when recording onto an HDMI. And chances are that if you're getting the Canon EOS R5 for your professional needs, you are gonna record in an external HDMI already, because you're gonna wanna have your false colors, you're gonna wanna have your zebra, histogram, and a larger area. So all that stuff, you're gonna be able to accomplish it here for a fraction of the price. And even if you get an HDMI recorder, if you don't have one, and get this camera, you're gonna spend less money than actually getting the EOS R5. So something to keep in mind, guys. Now let's talk about battery life, because the Canon EOS R5 features the new LPE610H battery, which it lasts a little bit longer than the LPE6N battery, which is the one that we use here. Now, chances are that you already have a lot of these batteries laying around, so if you already have another Canon camera, you're gonna be able to use the same battery in this camera. And even though the battery on the Canon R5 can give you up to 50% more of recording time, chances are that you're gonna get more life out of the battery, because this camera is gonna be less demanding than the R5, and you know, there's nothing to lose right there. Now, one of the main complaints about the Canon EOS R is that it only features one SD card. And to be honest with you, that may be a problem if you are a wedding photographer, an event photographer, and you only have one camera and one SD card. And the reason why I say this is because I myself, I shoot a lot at the studio, and 99.9% of the time that I shoot at the studio, I shoot tethering. When I tether, I record onto the SD card, I record onto the computer, and also I have a folder in Dropbox that is syncing from the computer. So I have 3 backups. If you're also gonna shoot video and you're gonna be using an HDMI recorder, then you're gonna be able to also record onto the SD card and also record onto the HDMI recorder. However, I've never recorded via HDMI yet, but I know that that is possible. So, you know, unless you have such a bad luck, or unless you have only one camera and limited SD cards, you know, you can always pop different SD cards, you know, as you go, and mitigate the risk, you know, that way. But that's gonna be something for you to gauge. Now, one of the things that is actually really tempting about the Canon EOS R5 is the dual pixel autofocus version 2. Now, over here we have version 1, which is really snappy. It grabs focus. I mean, I don't miss a lot of focus in this camera. I say it's pretty similar to the Sony one, this version right here. Now, yes, it may be nicer to have something even faster, but I actually photographed my daughter. She's 1.5 years. She runs like a cheetah throughout the yard, and no problem grabbing focus. I think that most of us are not gonna have a problem either. You may not have a problem unless, you know, you do super fast sport or, you know, wildlife photographer, and you do want that additional, you know, extra focal capability. But again, it's going to be something for you to gauge if it's going to be worth it. But remember, you are going to have a lot of limitations with the R5, and I think that a lot of those limitations we don't have it with this camera. And to wrap it up, what are my conclusions and why I may be considering canceling my EOS R5? Well, very simple, guys. I cannot buy a camera that may lock up on me in the middle of the action. That's the worst thing that can happen to any photographer, any videographer. Relying on a piece of gear that costs you $3,900 that can actually die on you in the moment that you need it the most. I cannot afford that. Pre-COVID-19, I used to do a lot of conventions and trade shows, and every time I travel, I like to travel carry-on. If it doesn't fit in my backpack, I don't bring it with me. Usually I travel with an A camera, such as the EOS R or the A7R4, and my B camera usually is the A6600 because it has great video features, great photography features. Now, relying on a camera like the EOS R5, spending $3,900, and that A camera died on me, that's very frightening for me, guys. With this camera, you have none of the overheating issues. You have 10-bit onto an HDMI recorder. There are ways to mitigate the one SD card, and there are also ways to mitigate the 1.75 crop using an even wider lens like the 15 to 35 millimeter. So this is gonna wrap it up for today's. Drop your comments down below. Let me know if you're in the same boat. What do you think about the Canon EOS R? And as always, guys, see you in the next video.